It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and with us to talk about the priests we need to save the church is Kevin Wells. Thanks for being here, Kevin.
Thanks, Kyle. Good to be here.
So in your book, you talk about your uncle, Monsignor, but you just call him Uncle Tommy. Can you tell us about him?
I can. Tommy was an enormous power for good as a priest in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area for 29 years. He shipped men into priesthoods. He just had that way about him where people said, I want what this man has. So men would drop girlfriends and jobs and whatever lifestyles, and they'd say, I want to become a priest because this guy gets it. So he, and I guess the bishop at that time knew it, so he continually transferred my uncle to different parishes that were suffering. And so he had, in the process, he had met many hundreds of friends and actually thousands of friends. So he just was a power for good.
What made him such a good priest?
Great question, Kyle. I would say three things. One, he knew to save souls was first done by raising high the Eucharist as a blazing furnace of foundation of our faith. He just loved the Eucharist. He couldn't get away from it, spent a daily holy hour in front of the Eucharist. And because of that, he was flooded by the graces to be able to pray well. So he spent an inordinate amount of time in prayer, which made him joyful. And I think that joy flooded over to, he had a devotion to our Blessed Mother. He loved Mary. So I think prayer, the Eucharist, and then prayer, and then Mary made him that people wanted to be around.
And where do you think that came from? What inspired him to this greatness that maybe others haven't really lived up to?
That's an excellent question. He was a reader. So way back in high school, he started to read some of the great classics. He started to read the church doctors. He was led to Plato and Augustine. And I think he threaded things together through Aquinas, Augustine, and he realized that this glorious truth can be found in the Catholic faith. So when he realized that this beautiful faith was true and real, he said, you know what, I not only believe it, I want to show it to the world.
How did it impact you in your life and your faith?
Explosively. I lived in his shadow for 40 years. I traveled the world with him, to Ireland, to Montana, to all over, and I just saw the way people gravitated to that joy he had. I saw a woman in a bar try and pick him up, and he said, hey, sweetie, I'm a priest. I don't care. He loved Christ, and he wanted people to know Christ so they could get to heaven. He wasn't a priest that was accommodating or accompanying. He was a priest who spoke truth. And even if that person that he was with initially maybe were staggered by something he said that was not accusatory, but sort of, squaring his shoulders up and saying, hey, sweetie, or hey, sir, you're wrong here. Mm-hmm. You're wrong. After a while, they'd come back to him because they'd realize that he was only trying to preach truth to get them to heaven.
And he was murdered in 2001. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, he was murdered in his rectory in a grotesque murder scene. A man staggered out of a bar drunk, broke into his rectory, and stabbed him to death 2 days after my wife and I had visited him in that same rectory to spend time with him.
Then this story is just so amazing, and this is just kind of I don't think I'm giving away too much here because it's just the kind of the beginning of the book, but you have this illness, you're in the hospital, and can you just break down a little bit of the story of this miracle in the hospital?
Sure, and it was a miracle. Not one of those miracles where you find the keys under the couch and you're like, oh my gosh, it's a miracle. It's not one of those miracles. It was a miracle that two people actually paid witness to with their own eyes. But so I had invasive brain surgery after a brain aneurysm, and the surgery did not work. The surgeon turned to my wife, Krista, and said we just couldn't go any further or else he would have died. So this was the day that I was, set to die. My wife, thank God, called Father Wells' best friend, Tommy's best friend, Monsignor, or Father Jim Stack, and said, hey, Father Stack, you got to come to the hospital and pray over him. Providentially, Father Stack had just started a healing ministry. So he came into my darkened ICU room. He said he came up to my bedside, and he said, hey, Kevin, we've been praying the Divine Chaplain on the drive over to the hospital. calling on all the Maryland saints. Is there a saint that we can call on for you to intercede? And I had been incapacitated the entire day because of the brain surgery. And what he said, and what his sort of his assistant in the healing ministry said, is I opened my eyes and I said, "Bring Tommy down, bring my uncle down." Mm-hmm. And he said, "Oh my goodness." So he went to the foot of my bed and he said, "Hey buddy," and he's talking to his best friend now. Yeah. Say, "Hey buddy, your nephew Keggy, he just asked you to save his life, so you got to do it. Hey buddy, save your nephew's life right now." And thereafter, I'll just leave it at that for the people that want to read the book. But I'm talking to you now, Kyle, so I didn't die.
Right. Have you pursued the cause for his canonization at all?
I've been asked that about countless times since the book's been released, and before the book was released. Uh-huh. My dad was father was his brother. People are right now pursuing his canonization. I think it's indelicate for me because I know he would say, "Kevin," Tommy, if he was alive today, say, "Kevin, don't you dare," because he was a humble man. But I'm learning that he had impact on many hundreds and hundreds of souls that he helped really pull from hell. People that were cheating on their wives, people that were embezzling money. I mean, over and over and over again, people have come out of the woodwork to say, let me tell you what your uncle did to save my soul. So to answer your question, it is being pursued, but I'm not pursuing it.
Yeah. We're talking with Kevin Wells. The book is The Priests We Need to Save the Church. And talking about your Uncle Tommy just kind of sets the scene a little bit of what a good priest looks like. And would you say that a good priest in 2019, that's the attributes, the Eucharist, prayer, and Mary, or is it more complicated than that?
Well, what I find striking, as it is staggering, is it doesn't seem to be anymore. And I think it's a time for candor in American Catholicism. And candidly, year after year after year after year, in my diocese, for 18 years, whatever new priest or pastor was sort of brought to my parish, I simply did not see it. What I saw was a contraception of that. I saw a contraception of truth. So rather than exposing the Catholic faith in its 2,000 years of splendor, what I began to see was just rather a bridge to get me to heaven. I saw a dam. Rather than life, I saw a contraception of truth, which led me finally to say, you know what, I want to speak to Father of what I thirst for, which led to the book.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think this is Catholics in general, just having a lukewarm, kind of mentality about our faith, but why do you think that makes its way to the priesthood?
Well, in the priesthood, it's a lack of fatherhood. It's a fatherlessness. A shepherd marks his identity for keeping his flock. If that one sheep gets lost from the fold, that shepherd's going to go out after him, and he's going to die in the process if he needs to. And I think what's happened in modern times is this zeitgeist, this political correctness, has straitjacketed priests from the prophetic voice. The prophetic voice is muted today because I think too many priests, and again, Kyle, I'll say it's time for candor. There's too many bachelors in rectories. And I say that not judgmentally, but from what I've seen with my own eyes. I don't see priests trying to lead me to heaven. They don't seem attuned to my soul or my kid's soul or my wife's soul because they're talking about things that simply, in my opinion, don't matter as regards the state of my soul. So I think it's part of whether it's a laziness, whether it's in effeminacy where you don't want to take things on, or you don't want to get hammered in the back of the church after a tough homily. I don't get it because that's what they're ordained for. That's what they're anointed for, really for two things: to administer the sacraments because the priests, only they can do it, but also, as important, to save souls. And you save souls by speaking boldly, by leading boldly, by being a father boldly.
I definitely know many priests that are doing that and are great examples. And of course, we do have some that might be struggling in this area, or maybe they think it's better to be softer and more welcoming and just have a different approach, which then, we're kind of not being led to the truth as well. So what can we as laity do to help this?
Great question. So my brother is a priest. I have 8 to 12 friends, close friends, who are good, solid priests. I love priests. Mm-hmm. Number one, we pray every day for priests. I certainly do. Mm-hmm. There's litanies that we pray. But I do think, really, Kyle, practically, I think what we do is if we sense something, sort of that sensus fidelium that rises up within us, where something is not being, something's being straitjacketed, or maybe something just wasn't shared, or maybe even something skirts hereticism. I think it's contingent upon us, and we owe it to God, really. We owe it to the pastor, we owe it to the parish to just ask questions. Because I think until we ask questions, Father, I see holiness in you, I see greatness in you, but I want to help bring it out of you, because I don't sense that you, to be candid, Father, I don't sense that you're really speaking to my soul. So I just think by asking questions to maybe something, if we sense a hesitancy or a flat-footedness, is charitably, lovingly, it's all done out of love. Is, Father, could we just engage in a conversation?
I suppose also whenever we do hear things that are challenging, and we appreciate that, to express our gratitude as well, to encourage the good things, because if all they hear is complaints about the good things, then they're not going to be as likely to share those probably as well, right?
Well, sure. I mean, look, the priest holds invulnerable sacred heirlooms in his hands. That's his identity. When he was anointed, he crawled into the skin of Christ. He is Jesus Christ. So at the end of the day, just read the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and see how Jesus got it done, and every day wake up and say, geez, I'm going to strive to be like Christ. And Kyle, you and I both know that it wasn't always pretty with Christ. He spoke, he loved, he tended to the poor, he put the kids on his lap. But boy, oh boy, whether it was a woman at the well or whether it was the money changers, Jesus did what he had to do. The mission is still the mission. The mission is not lost. We're here to spread Catholicism throughout the world.
So this is great for our current priests. What about future priests? Any suggestions, tips, thoughts that you have on what we can do to encourage our sons or young men in our lives that we know, that if God would call them to the priesthood, that they'd be prepared for that?
Yeah, I think it's the greatest time in the world for young men that are aspiring the priesthood, because it's me telling my son, or Kyle, I don't know if you have a son, but
3.
It's 3. Well, there you go. You sit him down and say, hey, son, we all want to be heroes in our hearts as men. Well, guess what? The next 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, pray tell, 100 years, we're going through a crucifixion in the church. Have you ever considered what you want to do as one lone individual to help save this church for Our Lady of Sorrows or for Jesus Christ? What do you want? Do you want to get in this game? Because if you do, you're a good one and you're for it. So would you consider, in any capacity, being a martyr for the church? And I think boys will rise, and so will sisters. They'll rise up to the challenge and say, you know what, I want to staunch the bleeding. So I think you prepare them for that challenge and for that martyrdom. And I think young men are drawn to that, like a moth to the flame.
All right, well, where can people get your book?
I would go to, ask readers to go to sophiainstitute.com or Amazon or just your local Catholic bookstore.
All right. Again, it's called The Priests We Need to Save the Church. And really, this is so well written. The story just draws you in, and people should check this out. Kevin Wells is the author. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing with us. Appreciate it.
Kyle, it was great. Thank you very much.